Good evening and welcome. It is time once again for CU Immigration here on WRFU LP Urbana 104.5 FM. I will be your host for this evening. My name is Mr. Garza, and I'm here to let you know that WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign community. Views expressed are those of the speakers and are not intended to represent WRFU, UCIMC, Urbana Socialist Forum, or as we like to say on the video version of the show, UPTV. These views are our own, and by our, in this instance, I mean myself, as usual, and my charming guest, who has been here before, but she's back again for a special Election Eve broadcast of the show. How are you this evening?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm okay. Is that uncomfortable for you to have to lean forward like that?
Nope, that's perfect. Thank you for having me back.
Thank you for coming back. We were talking about smog in California.
Yes, we were. My name's Gurdeep. I'm originally from
right.
Los Angeles.
I guess we should have said that. I'm sorry. I figure everybody knew you by now. You know, you've been on the show before. Yes. Welcome. From Los Angeles. What part of Los Angeles?
It's a city called Paramount.
Paramount.
It's
like the motion picture?
Absolutely not.
Uh-huh. Oh, okay.
But home of the Zamboni ice resurfacing machine. That's our claim to fame.
Wow, really?
Yeah. Of all places where you would invent a Zamboni, it would be Southern California. Just, you know, that the tremendous amounts of snow we get. Not quite.
They were able to have the idea because they were not used to ice, so they could think outside of the ice box, so to speak.
Yeah. I didn't think of it that way.
I don't know. I'm just guessing.
Yeah.
So that's Paramount? It's not the motion picture Paramount?
No. It's the small, relatively small, 50,000 people. So LA's different from most cities, but it's basically, I guess people are familiar with Chicago as a reference point.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
If each neighborhood was a city, that's
right.
how LA is.
And then it just kind of
turned
into one great big. So is there any, like, demarcation point, like when you're going to some other part, is it like kind of thin out a little bit and then get thick again, or is it just like...
Absolutely not.
No, okay.
You really don't know when you're going from one city to the next.
Yeah, I figured that was the case. That's sort of how I remember it, because I lived out there, gosh, it was a long time ago now. I won't say how long ago, but anyway, I remember getting directions from people to find places, and I was just like, well, this is a different city? It's like, yeah, it's, whatever, the name of the place would be. And you just kind of drive and you'd see, if you'd missed the sign, then you didn't know that you had gone from one place to the other. You just were in another place. It all looked the same. Everybody dressed the same,
Yeah.
So it was rather confusing for a small town boy like myself to navigate back in the day. But I was young and adventurous, so I figured it out.
Nice.
More or less. Because I didn't drive. Other people drove me, so I just... Anyway, that has nothing to do with anything. So, so really you're from L.A. I mean, you're a big city person, not a small city person, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And we sort of talked about this kind of thing before on the show, like what that was like for you growing up there. Do you have like recollections of, I do or don't fit in here? I mean, did you always feel like, oh, this is a cosmopolitan place, I fit in here, I'm just as much a resident here as anybody else? Or did you feel like, I just kind of stick out in some way?
No, I always felt like I fit in. The only thing was, so I was the only Indian American kid at my school, in a school that was like 85 to 90% Latino, and then like 10% African American, and so on. But in those moments, like those few moments where it's like, oh wait, do you celebrate Christmas? And like I remember growing up like that. But I was like different in that sense. And when you're a kid, it's like, wait, you're Indian American, does that mean you're Native American? What does that mean? But it was never like I didn't belong.
Didn't people just assume you were Mexican?
Yes.
Or something? Yeah.
And they still do. And people come up to me and speak Spanish, and I like to pretend I can speak Spanish.
Yeah.
Sí, yeah, claro.
Claro. Not really, sort of. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. See, I grew up here in whatever you'd call this, farm country, corn country, something like that. And it was strange for me because I didn't realize that I wasn't like everybody else, but they all knew it. And so it was this strange thing where they were sort of telling me that I was different in subtle ways, and I was not catching on somehow.
Yeah.
And I think it took me till high school before I figured out, oh, I'm kind of exotic or something. And that's how I thought of it, is like, oh, wow, I've got different hair and different skin and different, I've kind of faded now that I'm getting old, but used to be darker, and my hair was black and everything. And so it took a long time because no one ever really told me, and I didn't know, and it was a strange thing.
And I think, so it took me 3 to 4 months into my program till I finally looked around and realized, oh, I'm only one of 3 people of color in my cohort, and I'm the only, the other 2 are 2 African-American gentlemen, and I'm the only brown person. We have international students, but in terms of people, I don't know, first generation American or second generation, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But I think that's to the credit of the Midwest. I wasn't, it took me 4 months to realize, wait, I'm the only person of color in this room. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. That's one of the things that I think is really interesting about race, or people's conceptions of race, is how it is pervasive in one way and really not in another. And so you kind of, that's why it can be so shocking when you find yourself in a situation where suddenly it's important to somebody, because you're used to it being more nebulous. Like I was saying, I grew up not really realizing I'm used to not being singled out. Mm-hmm. I mean, I get the question, so what are you? I get that sort of thing from time to time. And not so much as I used to, though, which is weird. But I do get that, and things like that. Like, what kind of name is that? That sort of thing. But that's like just noise. That's kind of like statistical noise. It isn't weird until you get into this situation where suddenly it's like, oh,
yeah.
Wow. You're reacting to me in a very strange way. That's so weird.
I've had those moments too. And I didn't realize that those moments were attributed to race at first. Mm-hmm. It was like a pattern that developed. It was at the end of last year when I realized, okay, race is a factor here. So just one of the biggest things, one of the clearest places it comes out is customer service.
Ah, okay.
And it drives me nuts. So, and I think this is something it's very hard to understand. So, microaggressions are, people might say you're complaining about this or you're too sensitive. Mm-hmm. But the problem with microaggressions is it's not one thing. It's not somebody being blatantly racist to you and then you can react and you can
right.
say, hey, and you can stick up for yourself. Mm-hmm. Microaggressions are your daily navigation, and over time that builds up, being slighted repeatedly, and you can't go off on the next person that
right.
rubs you the wrong way, because then you look like the crazy person. But it's this series of things that have been happening on repeat, and you're just this ball of frustration at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, and I know a lot of people that experience that sort of thing, and I've been with them in these moments, and it's really hard as an ally or a friend to figure out how to react to that, because it's I am aware that you're being really rude to this person or you're being whatever, but you probably aren't. And so the person could take the object of that scorn or that weird curiosity or that can I touch your hair, whatever that thing is, has some sort of justification for saying, hey, why are you doing this to me? But as an outside person, what do I do? How do I do that? Boy, that's a weird thing to say. What do you mean? And then you get into this whole,
Yeah, and we were talking about LA earlier, and there's this perception that I truly agree with. Like, we are rude and we are mean. But we're also like just friendly and happy people, I think.
Yeah.
And what I'd like to see, if anyone studied this, is the tourists' reactions based on race that visit LA. So is it overwhelmingly white people who feel that LA is rude? Because they're used to being treated with deference.
Ah, yeah.
And do people of color have a very positive experience when they visit LA because they're being treated equally as, anybody else?
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting thing. I don't know how you could study that necessarily.
I
suppose you could.
Yeah, like take surveys of people, because that's what you hear, like, oh, people in LA are rude, and a lot of people do say this, and I'm like, well, maybe you're just entitled or used to being treated a little bit better, and you don't notice it. You don't notice it until you're not treated that way.
Yeah. That's interesting. I'm not even sure how one would go about looking that up or finding that research, but it would be interesting to know if somebody's got to have done that by now, you would think.
I don't know. I don't know if anybody has as much of an ego about LA as I do. So, yeah.
What I remember most about going to LA for the first time was, okay, I grew up, I'm Mexican, but I didn't. My father was just like, he just wanted to deny it. He's like, no, you're white, and even to this day. Literally just a couple of days ago, I had to give him a ride somewhere, and he, out of nowhere, comes up with this thing. I was reading the other day about the term Caucasian, and discovering all the different things. And so he goes on this long thing about where Caucasians come from and who all can be considered. He has done this to me off and on throughout my life. Like, you realize when it's time for the census, he will call me up and say, you can put white down if because you're just some weird thing. It's like, I'm not, I am and I'm not. I am generally, if you put me in a room full of white people, most people will say, there's a room full of white people. They won't single me out. But over time, they'll get a little bit like, you just don't look quite like we do. You're just a little different, and are you like Armenian? Or I'm not sure. Italian? You're Italian, right? They know it's something, and they can't put their finger on it, and it bugs them until I explain it. And then they're like, oh, you don't look Mexican. It's like, then why did you ask? Anyway, but this is a long way. But so in high school, I discovered, okay, I'm different. I'm exotic. By the time I, was traveling around and I went to Los Angeles the first time, I thought, finally, I'm going to be around people like me, because I'm Mexican. There's a lot of Mexicans there. It's going to be great. I'm going to get off the plane, and I'm going to be like, oh, my brothers and sisters, I finally will fit in somewhere, because I'm so sick of this Midwestern, I don't quite fit in thing. I get out there and I see real Mexicans, and I'm like, whoa, I don't look anything like you. I'm lost. I had no people. For some reason, in the back of my mind, I was sure that if I ever fit in or found myself with other people of a similar ethnic background, I would finally feel like I belonged somewhere. And then I realized, no, I have too much French or Irish or whatever from my mother's side in me. I don't look anything like these people. And of course, I don't talk like them. I don't act like them. Mm-hmm. I know nothing of their cultural stuff. So, I don't fit anywhere.
And that's like, that's a lot of experiences that immigrants have. Just just the idea of like fitting in. So I did not grow up with any Indian American like family around me. It was just me, my immediate family, and then all of my friends. Like, everybody was Latino,
right?
And I've made friends here who are Indian, like international students. But that was a community I never interacted with, and so I feel that way. I feel more at home among Mexican Americans than I ever do among Indian Americans.
That's the weird thing about moving around and people mixing and blending, is that stuff happens. And it's not the assimilation that your average, how can I put this without referring to ethnicity, your average American imagines when they say, well, they're not assimilating. That's not how you do it. You don't suddenly go over and you're waving a little flag and going, oh, baseball and hot dogs, yes, I love this. That's not assimilation. That's pretending. Assimilation is where you just absorb stuff and we trade it until you're kind of like me and I'm kind of like you, and we have this thing, and it's something that isn't what you started with and isn't what I started with. It's some new thing, this new chemistry we've created between us. And that's the same thing as friendships or anything else. You get to know your friends, and after a while it's like, I never liked Game of Thrones before, but you're a big fan and you got me into it, and now we watch it together. It's stuff that you just absorb from the people you're around. And I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know where I'm going with
I
that.
learned this term transmigrant recently, and I realized that defines my parents.
Mm-hmm.
So they are not so transmigrant means you are not somebody who moved from point A to point B, but you might have moved from point A to B to C, or you moved to different places and maybe moved back or moved to a few different countries before you ended up at wherever your final destination is at the moment. And so my parents absorbed a lot of they lived in Europe and different European countries, and my dad lived in Central America and in Mexico, and he just picked up a bunch of different things. And so I grew up, and I realized very slowly that some of the terms that I had grown up saying that I thought were Punjabi, which is the Indian language we speak, were not Punjabi at all. Like, they were German and they were Spanish.
Ah, yeah.
And I would say these words, and my Indian American relatives would be like, what are you saying? And that's just part of my family's unique vocabulary.
Right.
And nobody else beyond us understand it.
Exactly. Yeah, families are little micro cultures, Families have culture. And that was always the weird thing for me, because growing up, because mine didn't really. It had I don't know how to put it. It's like it had culture that it learned off of TV. So you have Mexican come here and it's like, we want to be white. So we watch TV and we look at people and we pick up their stuff, and that's what we practice at home. So I was raised with this very thin, superficial version of Midwestern whiteness that I thought that was just, I thought it was normal. I thought that's how people were. But when I was around people, like my friends, theirs was so different. It was like there was something, it had depth and breadth and complexity to it that I didn't understand. And so it was just like, oh, you people are all weird. My idea was just everything was just really simple and straightforward and superficial, because that's what I was raised with undertones of culture that I did not get to see directly, so I didn't know what it was. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
it's really hard
bit.
to describe, but that's how I grew up, and so I couldn't relate to other families, and I couldn't relate to anything, and over time it was sort of isolating in this really weird way. It wasn't until I started spending time with people from very different cultures from the one that I grew up with that I started getting some sense of it's hard to explain, but I was talking to my friend in Japan about this last night, as a matter of fact. We were talking on Skype. She had gone to Tokyo and to visit because she lives in Kyoto. And I forget how she was around some people at a zine fest or something.
Okay.
And it was just weird and uncomfortable for her because she didn't really feel like she fit in. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, she was sort of musing about the fact that here, when she comes to the States and go to Chicago, we went to Chicago together to a zine thing up there. It was perfectly comfortable, and it was a lot of fun. And she went to London to do some research to a zine thing there, and that was perfectly comfortable. And the thing that it was telling me was that it's easier to be different in a place where you're obviously different and everybody around you recognizes your difference than it is to be different in a place where you're supposed to be the same and people are expecting you to be one of them, but you're not.
Yeah.
Then you don't fit, and then it's weird, and it's just like uncomfortable. So I have found myself more comfortable with people who are really different from me than people who are supposedly kind of the same.
Huh, that's really, I hadn't thought of it that way. I wonder how much of it is also just like there's this dominant culture. I don't know. That's interesting. I don't think
I don't know either. But that's what hit me when she was talking. I was like, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about, because I have had that same thing too. I've had that. It's like it's okay for me to not fit when I just know I don't fit. It's like, okay, I'm going around these people that I'm total stranger, total alien to them.
Okay.
That's fine. Okay, I can find common ground. We can get along. It's okay. But where I'm supposed to fit, or where I feel like I'm supposed to fit, and I don't, then that shows how much I don't fit.
I wonder if that's like
Throws it in my face.
because then it's like cultural tourism, where the I don't know, host culture is like, okay, this person's here for a bit and let's learn from each other, versus, okay, this person's here permanently and I'm going to have to make some major shifts. I don't want to make any major shifts. How long are you going to be around for? What are you doing?
It could be some of that too. That's possible. I don't know. It's just really interesting. And I guess I should mention to the listener, none of this has anything to do with the election in a direct sense, except that the election is in a weird way, or not a weird, a very uncomfortable way, a referendum on whiteness or not. Really, if you think about it, it's like one candidate who pretty much represents, or has come to represent, whether he intended it that way or not, whiteness, and a return to America as a European descendant, Western cultured place, dominant place, or a candidate who has come to represent the aspirations of those who like to think that they deserve to be here as well, and that this is their country too. I don't know that either candidate meant to do that. I think one kind of did, kind of, sort of, but I know the other one probably didn't, because the other one could really be said to be a representative of that same whiteness, except that it's a more inclusive, it's a more welcoming whiteness. It's like, well, we're all here together, you know. Does that make sense?
I don't even know how to begin talking about what's going to happen in about 12 hours.
I'm too nervous about it. Yeah.
It's unfortunate. It's something I didn't realize that we were still going to be stuck on in 2016. But at the same time, I think what's beautiful about this election is it has really just brought everything to the surface. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's, the liberals are critiquing the Democratic Party, saying, what are you doing? And that's a lot. Like, I feel that liberals are very complacent. And they were kind of like, okay, yeah, we're good. Kind of, on the back burner, like letting things just happen. Mm-hmm. And this has like brought up some self-evaluation.
Yeah.
And then I don't know what the Republican Party is going to do, but I think I would like to hope that it's brought up some self-evaluation in terms of, well, these are ideas we've been supporting. We've been turning this blind eye to like scientific-driven facts, and that's caught up with us. And what what have we really been supporting this whole time? What are our aspirations? I hope that, I don't know, I hope that this election is a bit transformative, not just in the presidential office, but in the senators and the Congress people as well.
Well, there's a lot of blind, I suppose, this is an uncomfortable word, but tribalism that's going on. Obviously, people are going, well, whatever happens, I don't want those guys to win, so I will vote against them.
Yeah.
You know, there's a bit of that. But I think there's also, as you say, a lot of reflection, looking inward. Certainly probably more with Republicans, but I think Democrats too, because, you know, you had the whole Bernie Hillary thing going on, and so there are people going, well, which side am I, more corporate Democrat or am I more socialist, liberal? What am I? You know, so in the primaries there was a lot of soul searching, and a lot of people were really struggling during that period. And I know there are a lot of Republicans who are struggling even now, going like, well, where did my party go? I don't even recognize this. You know, it's weird.
Yes.
So,
and for Democrats, what do we say about a candidate who does cater to Republicans? Yes, we should be, reaching across these arbitrary lines.
Right.
But then I think the complacency, what I noticed was this white collar liberalism. So, I support gay marriage and I support, environmental regulation. Mm-hmm. But when it comes down to, well, do you support affordable housing being built right next to you? That's where we draw the line.
Oh, no, I don't want to.
Yeah, and when we bring up these real issues of race that are really uncomfortable to talk about, well, I don't want to speak about that. But I'll go vote blue all across the board.
Right.
What does that even mean?
Well, it's interesting. It has definitely been interesting. I'm sure pundits will be pontificating about this for years to come. Just long after it's settled one way or the other, they'll be like, well, this was the most interesting. And I think it was.
And it's global. You see this with Brexit. You see this with the refugee crisis.
Yeah. It's
an interesting point, I think, in history right now. And it would be nice if we had a nice, positive ending to this.
Yeah, if we could come through this in one piece, I think that would be really great. I'm not sure it's going to happen. I don't know. But yeah, but anyway, I bring the point up because, yes, the election is tomorrow, and I did announce this as an election eve special show, but we started talking about race and ethnicity and all that stuff because that's front and center in this election and this whole election season, the whole campaign season. It has been, whether you liked it or not, a point you couldn't avoid, as you know from your study. Did you finish that project you were working on?
Yes. Yes, I did. And I think this also, I don't know where this fits in exactly, but one of the things that I think that this election also brought up is the way that we have neglected rural America. And it's this cycle, and we need to, when we think of poverty, we think of urban poverty.
Right.
And people of color.